Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome back. We're in our continuing saga of our study of the book of Revelation. This is our 9th class. The weeks have flown. It just doesn't seem like it's been over 2 months since we started this. And we're very happy about the number of names that are out there who are getting them. Even if you're not watching or here, who have access to these classes as they are being produced and archived. We're very pleased with the number of names that have been interested. So welcome, everyone, and we'll continue tonight, as we always do, and we'll open with a word of prayer. And I'll ask if Brother Gerald, would you offer a word of prayer?
Our dear Father in heaven, we come before your throne of grace to ascribe unto you the glory, honor, and majesty and might that do your great and holy name, as we are assembled here once again this Thursday evening to resume the studies in the Apocalypse, and pray that you will continue to be the revealer of secrets unto us and open up the symbolisms that are there for your servants to understand. We pray your guidance and direction for our presenter, and pray that you'll be with us each and every one to understand those great and precious symbols that you have provided for us as we live in these last days, as we anticipate the coming of your Son. Be with us, Father, this evening, and help us to be further encouraged to come to a knowledge of thy truth here in the Apocalypse. We draw near unto you in praise and thanksgiving in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Brother Gerald. All right, just before we get started, just let everyone know who tune in every week or come every week here. Lee and I will be out of town next week, so we will be taking a week off, and we'll be back in 2 weeks. So try to remember that so that you don't tune in and wonder where we are, because we'll be far away from here. We'll be in Florida as we're heading out for a trip. So let's pick up with a little review, as we always do. Last week we got into the trumpet period, and as we talked about, the trumpets have to do with judgment on Catholic Rome, and some very interesting things are happening, and hopefully tonight, especially if we get as far as the last 3 trumpets, the woe trumpets, conditions change quite a bit in what's happening in history. So let's go ahead and move forward and bring ourselves back up to speed for those who might have missed last week. We left last week. We covered about the golden censer, that just before the trumpets were to sound, the golden censer that was filled with the prayers of the saints, that an angel took the censer in verse 5 of chapter 8 and filled it with fire of the altar and cast it into the earth. And there were voices, thunderings, and lightnings, and an earthquake. Of course, as we've talked about before, the voices, thunder, and lightnings are what we see in our opening scene. So we can see how these are interacting and what they really represent. It's the movement of God's power through the earth and the shaking that takes place. And as this started to unfold, and remember, the trumpets haven't even sounded yet, there's a little bit of historical place setting that's taken place before the trumpets sound. And remember, Constantine has at this time passed away, and his 3 sons are now ruling. And Constantine's 3 sons, Constantine, and Constance, would have entered peaceably into the possession of the empire, and the silence in the heaven would have remained unbroken. But this was not the purpose of God. And if you remember, the silence in heaven was that period of time after Constantine became sole emperor, which was about 14 and a half years before he died, where there was no war or anything like that. So it was a time of peace and quiet. But his 3 sons, once they took over, that changed. And they were eventually, in a very short period of time, they were killed in some fashion. Most of his family actually died a few years later. The earthquake that we mentioned very quickly, another emperor arose after his sons. His name was Julian. Paganism, under an emperor named Julian, reared its head briefly and persecuted the church clergy, bringing judgment and a political earthquake. He tried to restore to its former glory and bring paganism back as the state religion. And he got on this move, and the way he did that was he didn't attack the rank and file Christian. He went after the clergy and their buildings and things like that, which fits so well with setting the stage for the trumpet period of the conditions that were existed. This attempt, though not fully successful by Julian, was enough to subject the Catholic clergy to great tribulation, thus answering the prayers of the saints in that day. Remember the censer that was thrown to the earth. It's looked upon as that this was part of that answering of the prayers because he went after the clergy. But it didn't last long. It didn't take much past his time. And then we moved on, and the seven angels, which had the seven trumpets, prepared themselves to sound. And we talked about preparing to sound has a meaning. What does that mean? They're preparing to sound. Why aren't they just blowing their trumpets? It says each trumpet brought invaders upon some part of the Roman Empire. The trumpets are summoning those armies to move. It's a call to move. Of course, they don't hear a trumpet, an actual trumpet, but it's symbolically showing that the Lord is moving them through this time. And of course, those people that were moved were the barbarians who invaded Rome over the next several couple hundred years. And we're going to look at that here in more detail. But it was summoning them. And at this time, Rome is not doing so good. As their picture here shows, the Romans don't have the advantage they used to have on their home turf. We talked about how barbarians were employed to help fight other barbarian tribes, and then when those barbarians became strong enough, they were already armed by the Romans and living in the land, and they were able to attack within, while they were hired to keep other people out. So it really backfired on them. And we brought up this map about the four main sets of barbarians that came in. The Visigoths, the Vandals, the Huns, and the Ostrogoths. And how they, three of the four actually sacked Rome. And under the first trumpet that we covered, real quickly, it said that the first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth. And the third part of the trees was burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. Now, I didn't think to be as prepared for it last week, but I pulled the verses together because I was saying that the trees and the green grass were the people, because we find this symbolism in Scripture. Real quickly in Mark, the blind man, as his sight was coming back, he says, "I looked up and said, I see men as trees walking." And then in Isaiah, as our brother Randy brought up last week, he says, "The grass withers, the flower fades, because the Spirit of the Lord blows upon it. Surely the people are grass." So we see these words applied to the populace of people. You can take it for what it's worth, but it appears to be dealing with the people, and we will see that more as we go along. And the first barbarian that got control was Alaric, the king of the Goths, and he's most famous for his sack of Rome in 410, which marked a decisive event in the decline of the Roman Empire. And for the first time, Rome realized it was no longer invincible because these people could come in. And these weren't just people like our native Indians that we dealt with here in the Old West, who lived in teepees and only had bows and arrows while we had rifles and things like that. Keep in mind, these men some of them had come up in the ranks of the Roman army. but they were of a different ancestry. So that they were not barbarian as we understand barbarian to be ignorant people who just have no organization whatsoever. Alaric turned his focus on Rome itself and besieged it 3 times between 408 and 410 AD, bringing its inhabitants, the trees and the grass, to starvation. And what Jerusalem had suffered 4 centuries earlier was now returned upon the head of Rome. So for the first time, Rome is suffering many of the things that they had done to the other nations that they overthrew. And then we got into the second trumpet. This is very quick. If you want to know more about what we talked about, go back and watch the link to the last class, because I don't want to take too much time here. The second trumpet was blown. And it said, and the second angel sounded, as it were, a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea. And we looked up real quickly how nations are compared to mountains. Nebuchadnezzar was compared to one, and we know that Christ is compared to the kingdom that grew in Nebuchadnezzar's image. So we know it's dealing with another nation, but it seems to have something to do with the sea. It says, because in the third part of the sea became blood, and the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. So we can see that it has something to do with a naval battle. And the very next group to come in were, as we see in this map, the Vandals, who attacked from the sea. They were the second people to come in and sack Rome and take everything they wanted. And this is about 20 years after the Visigoths had done what they had done. And this is an actual painting of Genseric, who was actually the king of the Vandals, sacking Rome. And as I showed you last week, if you look right here, you can see the Catholic Church there watching Rome being sacked. It's interesting that they actually put this image in there, and this painting was done probably several hundred years ago, but it's right there, what's taking place here. Now, because it was on the sea, the eastern and western Roman fleets at different times were rallied to attack Genseric's fleet. But he used the tactic that we talked about last week of ships that are called fire ships, where as the Romans came at them, of course, lined up in their ranks, he used these fire ships, which were old ships filled with combustibles, then set them on fire and steered them into the midst of the enemy's fleet, consequently setting many on fire. And of course, it broke the ranks of the ships up, it disorganized, they couldn't signal, and he had an advantage by he softened up the enemy quite a bit before they ever even fired a shot, so to speak. And of course, he sacked Rome and left, just like Alaric sacked Rome and he left. He didn't overtake it and sit on the throne. They took what they wanted and then they left. But then they were gone after a few years. Then the third trumpet. We talked about, and the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp. And it fell upon the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of waters. So obviously this sounds like it's going to be internal, inside the land. And of course, our next one that came along is the well-known one that we know the most is Attila the Hun and what he did. And we talked about how he had amassed an army of nearly about 500,000 men, at least, that they can recall. So he was quite powerful and organized. Again, on our map, you'll see he's the green. He never made it to Rome. He was moving towards Rome, but the land had been so devastated from famine and war that he could not sustain his army, so he returned. He started to return home, and along the way he died. He came very quickly, did a lot of damage, and then suddenly he was gone. And we talked real quick how we can see how we are moving through history from the Goths from 395 to the Huns. We've moved approximately 60 years. All of this has happened. But he was called the Wormwood Star. That's Attila the Hun. and he blazed like a torch and embittered the river populations of the country. This was the area that he hit the hardest, and as you can see, all the little rivers that existed up there. So that's why the rivers were turned to blood. It wasn't a naval battle or anything of that nature. It was all inside the land, and it fit very well. And history helps us to prove, I think, how this was directed at the church of the Catholic Rome. Because this is a recorded history from that day of a man that lived at that time. And I'll read it real quick for those who didn't get it last week. The barbarian nation of the Huns, which was in Thrace, became so great that more than 100 cities were captured, and Constantinople almost came in danger, and most men fled from it. And there were so many murders and bloodlettings that the dead could not be numbered. Aye, for they took captive, here we go, the churches and the monasteries and slew the monks. There's the targeted trumpet right there, that he would record that. And I want to say again, we'll see these all through history. These are the guideposts through time that God has given to us who are searching. The general population would never get that as being part of the fulfillment of Revelations, but it is, and it was written for us, and it is up to us to pull it out and to share it with the next generation. He was not a fixed luminary in the political heavens, but a meteor which blazed with destructive brightness and then disappeared in the midst of the destruction he caused. He died before he ever got home. And he was gone. He was buried in a river, supposedly, and the men that buried him supposedly were executed, and he just disappeared from history, except for what we know that was recorded of those times. So which brings us where we are today, where we left off, the fourth trumpet. So let's move forward and open the curtain on this scene. And what Scripture tells us here is very, very interesting about this time. And the fourth angel sounded, and the third part, here again we have a third, just like we keep seeing this third come up in each one of these. A third part of the sun was smitten, a third part of the moon, and a third part of the stars. So as the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. So this is what this is happening in this fourth trumpet. These next events will be the eclipse of the Roman sun, moon, and stars, the extinguishing of the western third of the Roman Empire. This is where Rome really starts to come apart in a larger scale, because it's not just attack and losing a little land here or there. It's actually who sits on the throne next and what happens. So how did this unfold? How did the western part of the empire finally collapse? The first three trumpets, as we looked at, had reduced Rome to a fragment of an empire. The land was just filled with all of these different people, ethnic people, who were more than happy to attack the major cities, and they had been armed, and they had been educated in warfare. So Rome was not going up against inferiors, but equals, who they had made their equals. The word barbarian is used very wrongly, as if you think it's just ignorant people who don't have a lot of knowledge or education. They were just more tribal. The barbarians were more the master of the area than Rome by this time. The fulfillment of this trumpet has a two-step process. Real quickly, I found this map this week. The Western and the Eastern Roman Empire by 476, and that's where we are as this fourth trumpet, at the end of the fourth trumpet period. As you can see, Rome, the blue is the Western Empire in 476. There's not much left. Italy is about it. It shows you how they've pretty much been cut in half as far as the empire as a whole. Their holdings are very small and very weak, and you cannot sustain an army that can take that back. The Eastern Empire has not broken up yet. It still has some of its force, but when we get into the woe trumpets, that changes. So, moving on, this two-step process started with this emperor right here. It's not a very good picture of him, and there's very little known about him. And the reason is because he was just a boy. His name was Romulus Augustus. He was born perhaps around 460 and died around 476. Died after 476, and they think he may have lived to 500 AD. History doesn't even know, because when he was off the throne, he kind of disappeared, and there's very little recorded about him. He's thought to be the last Western Roman emperor. And it's very interesting, if you know your first kings and emperors, Romulus was the name of the first king. Remember Romulus and Remus, who history says started the Roman Empire? Well, Romulus was the first king. It's interesting, his name. His father must have had high hopes for him, because his other name was Augustus, which was the name of the first emperor of Rome. So he's been given these auspicious names, but he disappears as a child. But as we'll see, Romulus' father, Orestes, was a Roman citizen who had served as a secretary and diplomat for Attila the Hun, and later rose through the ranks of the Roman army. He went on to become very, very high in the Roman army, to the point that he could have been emperor. You read the history about it, but history records nobody really knows why he didn't take that position. Romulus, a youth of about 13, so we can see who we have sitting on the throne, acted as a figurehead for his father's rule, reigning only 10 months. His father put him on the throne. He could have, but he didn't take it. Maybe it was that whole assassination thing. I don't know. We don't know. But history doesn't even record why he would not take that step when it was available to him. He only reigned 10 months. Several months after Orestes took power, with his son on the throne, a coalition of barbarian mercenaries. Keep in mind, mercenaries, this is a group of mercenaries that are acting on their own, not so much as like the Huns or the Vandals or something. It's just a group that have pulled themselves together and have gotten a lot of power. A coalition of barbarian mercenaries demanded that he give them a third of the land in Italy. Now, here we have a third again. Now, history records this. This isn't scripture. History records a third. I think that's fascinating that word is in there. Again, a guidepost through time that God might be showing us. Look here. When Orestes refused, the tribes revolted under the leadership of the barbarian chieftain Odoacer. And Orestes, Romulus' father, was executed. So here, after 10 months, we got this boy whose father has been executed, who was probably really running the country. So, he's not really very intimidating. And this is Odoacer, first barbarian king of Western Rome. King of Western Rome. That's never happened before. And you can, this is a statue of him. You can see he was a pretty auspicious looking kind of guy, very powerful. At least that's the way he liked himself portrayed, I guess, in his statue. But anyway, history records this. This is an actual drawing that was done probably hundreds of years ago. Romulus resigns his crown to Odoacer and is exiled. He's sent away somewhere. I think they know where he went, but they don't know when he really died. He just kind of disappeared. So the last emperor of Rome just dissipates into time and disappears. He's gone. And we now have a barbarian, a total pure-blooded barbarian, not a half-breed or someone who was half Roman or anything like that. Odoacer reigned as a viceroy for the Eastern Roman Emperor. And I'd heard that word viceroy before. Viceroy is like a deputy type position. He didn't bring his own government. Remember, they were mercenaries. So they didn't have an organized government that they wanted to put into place. They just wanted to be in charge. But he agreed to keep things going under the Roman way of life, so to speak. And he was what's called a viceroy. He just kept things flowing. He didn't destroy and pillage and then leave. The Eastern Emperor conferred upon Odoacer the title of patrician, and that is it's a position where he has authority to control matters and run them on his own time, but he's got to still answer to the Eastern Emperor. And he was granted him legal authority to govern Italy in the name of Rome. He's governing Italy in the name of Rome. So it's still kind of like being run like Romans would run it, but with a barbarian sitting on the throne. You can see how things are starting to change. But keep in mind, if they're mercenaries and smaller group of people, they don't have quite the clout that some of these other ones have had. In 460, for the first time, a barbarian king sat on the throne of Rome, something that's never happened in 500 years, or however long Rome existed, which might even be a lot longer than that, by a couple hundred years. So things have really, really changed. You can imagine how morale has changed and things like that. He reigned 14 years until overthrown by the Ostrogoths. So here's the second step of this final collapse. 14 years he ran things. And this was the realm of what he ruled. As you can see, it's all of Italy and up into Austria, I believe. And up until 480 AD. He controlled this. But here was the problem. At the time, the Ostrogoths were settled in the Byzantine territory. And if I understand that right, that's farther to the north, up maybe more where Constantinople was, as allies of the Romans in the east, but were becoming restless. See, they had allied themselves with the east, so Rome was using them, but as always, they get powerful enough they can do what they want. But were becoming restless and increasingly difficult for Zeno, who was the Eastern Emperor, that was his name, Zeno, to manage. Not long after, Theodoric, a man by the name of Theodoric, became king of the Ostrogoths. He was their king. And he's over this group of people, even though they don't have their own country, but they are living in the Eastern Empire. The two men worked out an arrangement beneficial to both sides. The Ostrogoths needed a place to live, and Zeno, the emperor, was having serious problems with Odoacer, the king of Italy, obstinately a viceroy for Zeno. Odoacer was menacing Byzantine territory and not respecting the rights of Roman citizens in Italy. At Zeno's encouragement, Theodoric invaded Odoacer's kingdom. So this guy was kind of getting cocky and trying to do things his way, and he didn't care. He wasn't a Roman, so he wasn't really emotionally attached to the Roman way of life. And, of course, after 14 years, you may get a little arrogant and think you can start doing more things. Now, this is Theodoric the Great, king of the Ostrogoths. As you can see, notice how the dress has changed. You can see how we're starting to move into the Middle Ages. They're not dressed in tunics and wearing the old Roman garb, so to speak. He's got on armor. You can see that Middle Age appearance starting to come. And this is a barbarian now. He doesn't look very barbaric, but he's considered a barbarian. But he looks like a very well-trained, equipped soldier. And this is what Rome was dealing with. Theodoric attacked Odoacer as he agreed, and the two men agreed to make peace. Odoacer said, "Okay, I can't fight you. You're more powerful than me. I'm just the viceroy with a few mercenaries at my to support me." And he had an organized army. While at a banquet with Odoacer to discuss peace, Theodoric drew his sword and killed him. So he got rid of him. The whole thing was planned that way from the start. Well, now, I don't know whether the Eastern Emperor had it planned that way, but he had his own plans once he got in there. And this is where the empire really collapses on that side. He set up his kingdom totally independent of the Eastern Emperor. totally independent. He was not going to be a viceroy or a sheriff for Rome. This was his world now. And of course, as we can see, he was now as small as Rome was getting. He could hold his own. Yeah, they were getting that way. While he promoted separation between the Ostrogoths and the Roman population, Theodoric stressed the importance of racial harmony. He didn't want to wipe them out. He didn't want to throw them all out. He didn't want to make slaves of them. He actually, if you read the history, I believe he kept the Roman way of life intact, but there was going to be a separation. Theodoric stressed the importance of racial harmony though intermarriage was outlawed. Seeking to restore the glory of ancient Rome, he ruled Italy in the most peaceful and prosperous period until his death in 526. So even though he made it his kingdom, he ran it the way the Romans would run it. I mean, he had an infrastructure in place. So he just used it. And the people could swallow it as long as you're not, pillaging them and making slaves of them and murdering all the men and things like that. They could work with that if it brought peace. By this time, the western third of the Roman Empire is extinguished and the Middle Ages begin in the West. We're moving now into the Middle Age period. This is the maximum extent of the territories ruled by Theodoric. As you can see, it's gone. The Vandals still have a little bit in there. The Visigoths are still present. But as you can see, it's no longer run by Rome. They're gone. They're all in the east now, as far as the government. There's still Romans living there, of course. This guy was very well appreciated. This is the tomb of Theodoric the Ostrogoth, and you can still go there today and see his tomb. So this wasn't one of those barbarians that just died suddenly and nobody, like Attila the Hun, and nobody knows where he is today. I mean, this guy was given a tomb and all, so he became worthy of that honor. I can't remember. It probably is. I don't know the exact location, but it probably is because that's where he ruled from. So the symbols seem to fit very well when you think about the symbols. The western third, sun, moon, and stars were eclipsed, and their light went out forever. The fourth trumpet had foreshadowed the extinction of the Western Roman Empire. And so at this time, first one half of Rome doesn't exist anymore, and we're just the latter part of the fifth century. So moving forward, and this is just a little something I thought about as I was putting all this together. From the world's point of view, and I think I typed this in on the internet, what caused the decline of the Roman Empire? It's just a question. If you had to write it down, what caused the decline of the Roman Empire? Of everything that you and I have been studying and looking at, and it fits very well. Dynastic succession problems, bureaucratic corruption, think back all the way to Commodus, all those guys. Inequitable economic burdens, inequitable meaning unfair economic burdens, regional, racial, or ethnic tensions, decline of morale and martial spirit, that's a warlike spirit, moral decline, and other worldly religions, I guess being Christianity, and external enemies. So that's how the world will record how Rome fell. And really, technically, that's exactly what happens. But we know that this is all God's plan. And we know how God works in the nations, because we know so well in Nebuchadnezzar's image what he was told of what's really happening that you and I know that the world would never know, is that the Most High is sovereign over all the kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he wishes and sets over them the lowliest of people. We know how God's working. They never knew that God was doing all this. They never heard trumpets. They never heard anything like that. But God, in all of those things that were listed there, God was working in those things in the background the whole time. The barbarians, from the way history tries to present them, were the lowliest of people. You had these people who were tribal, who through the most powerful nation, empire in the world. I suggest to you possibly that they are part of the ankles of the image, that because it became a very mixed people that were starting to fill up this part of the earth where the Roman Empire once stood. And that's something that maybe we'll look at later, but as you can see, the stone eventually that will come and strike the image and bring all that to an end. But we, through history, can see how God has been working, where the world doesn't even see it all, and all of those things, that God is actually working constantly. So that brings us to the end of the fourth trumpet. Before we goes on, is anybody else, because we move into a new section now, anybody any questions or anything you'd like to contribute? Because I've had a lot of good input. Jesse.
So that mausoleum was in Ravenna, Italy, about 218 miles south of Rome.
Oh, it's Ravenna.
Ravenna.
Okay, thank you.
Or north of Rome, sorry.
Yeah, it's just
Rome
north.
is south, yeah.
It's right up the coast on the what is it, the eastern side? Yeah, if you look at it on the map. Thank you. I knew it was close to that area. That might have been where his home was and all, but it's all real close. Yes, Brother Gerald.
It's a matter of noting the different groups there that went through this process. It talks about the Goths, and then it talks about the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths, right? The Ostrogoths are the Eastern Goths. The Visigoths are the Western Goths. Right. And then you have the Goths themselves. So there's three ethnicities there, all Gothic peoples. Right. And as you said, they live in an uncivilized structure of their nations and all. They were very much barbaric in that sense, and that they had no structural nation.
Right, right. They were tribal. They didn't. They didn't like have so much capital cities and highways and things of that nature. They moved from place to place and took from the land what they could. Sort of like our native Indians did, but with more structure than that, of course. So now at this time, I don't know how far we'll get, but we'll see how we get involved in the woe trumpets. I find this to be extremely interesting part of the trumpets, probably my more favorite part, because you and I have really no connection to barbarians in any way. We can't go out and see their artwork or their architecture. There's a few monuments like Theodoric's things, but when we get into these woe trumpets, there are things that we can relate to today that still exist today. And I don't know if we'll get that far, but you'll see as it unfolds. In verse 13 of Revelation chapter 8, he says, "And I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the three angels which are yet to sound." Doesn't sound too good, does it? This isn't going to be better or lighter. We immediately almost get a sense there is something different about these trumpets. And you'll see that it kind of unfolds in a little bit different way. And plus it's going after a different place. This next era of time will focus on the Eastern Empire. That still exists, and it's going to come down. But how does it come down? So the West now belongs to this many different people. And I want you to keep in mind, as we go through this whole woe trumpet period of time, which is several hundred years, the barbarians are developing into other nations. They're becoming Christian. They're learning Catholicism. And all of that is taking place in the background that's not really recorded of how these people are developing, who later on went to become France and Germany and places like that. That's all kind of like simmering on the back burner while we look at these woe trumpets. And we'll get to that well down the road. Up to this point, and here's what I was just saying, Paganism was overthrown by Christianity internally. We know that. It wasn't something where Christians attacked Rome and threw paganism into the sea. It happened inside, like a boiling kettle. The barbarians that overthrew the Western Empire profess the same religion. So they've been indoctrinated. I don't know what they believed before they came into Rome, but they are becoming Christianized into the Catholic. Of course, the Catholic Church, as it grew, used those, and eventually when we get into like Charlemagne and those people, you'll see how it grew into another power of its own. Rome will now be visited by a new threat that would eventually have a bearing on the whole civilized world. And this is another thing. I didn't realize it when I first went through it, but 100 years will pass. The best I can tell, and from other writers, 100 years will pass before the sounding of the Fifth Trumpet. So you imagine in 100 years, a lot can happen ethnically, and organization over in the West is going on. Meanwhile, Rome in the East is dealing with a new threat that's going to come its way. And that threat is the rise of Islam. And we can already see right away, okay, I know what that is. It exists today. We're very familiar with Islam, and actually it's kind of risen in a way that we haven't ever really seen it when we were all kind of kids. It's really come into the forefront. So with that in your minds about where this is going, I'm going to ask Brother Jesse to come up and start into chapter 9 and to read verses 1 through 12. And as he does, I'll leave this picture up there if you want to just think about it as he reads.
The fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth. To him was given the key of the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace. And the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth. And unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth had power. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. And to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when it striketh a man. And in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. The shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and on their heads were as it were crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men. And they had the hair as hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions. And they had breastplates, as it were breastplates of iron. And the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots and many horses running to battle. And they had tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue his name was Apollyon. One woe is past, and behold, there came 2 woes more hereafter.
All right, thank you, Brother Jesse. You can just kind of listen to the symbology there of the things that are happening. We're now, although we deal with a star falling from heaven, we're dealing with bugs. We weren't dealing with bugs before. We were dealing with planets and moons and stars. But now we have locusts and scorpions. And the reason we're dealing with these things, it's very interesting, is that keep in mind also technology is changing in the world. And the technology plays a very major part in some of the things that happen in the world today compared to where they were back then. And we'll kind of see that as we go along. We won't spend a lot of time on it. But as we can see, we have this star falling from heaven, and we can see this pit kind of starting to come to life and gurgling up something. So let's let's delve into here and see what's down in this hole. So what we have here is a new political power was about to act upon the earth. Again, the West is gone. It's not even part of the picture right now. It has nothing to do with anything that's about to happen. There's no military force that can be drawn upon or anything like that to help them out. And it is about, I believe, from the best I can tell and from what other writers say, it's about Muhammad and the rise of Islam and how it plays a part in this. Now, some may disagree with that, but this is where I am right now. I'm open for any other possibilities about what it could be, but all I can say is it seems to fit, and I hope I can show you some things that make it hard not to see it that way. But again, it's totally up to you. Prophecy is a very hard thing to interpret and understand totally accurately, but he wants us to try. And this is my attempt to help get what other people have written about up in front so you can see and decide for yourself. So, verse 1, let's just start looking at the components here as we looked at in the other ones. And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth. And to him, and notice the star is personified as a him. So that it tells us it's not a literal star. It has to do with a man. Was given the key of the bottomless pit. So he has a key that's been handed to him, and he's going to open up some pit or hole. Just a suggestion here, the Greek for fall here, the word fall here is in the past tense from what I found on it. And this suggests that the star had already fallen when John saw it. In other words, it's possible, while other things were going on in the West, this was already kind of starting in the East. But it took a while before it really got going. And I'll throw out, there are a couple of thoughts on it. I can't tell you for sure what it is, but I'll throw them out there for you. There are two thoughts on the fallen star that I could find. Brother John Thomas said the star was a political power, Islam, that had fallen upon the earth, or the Eastern Empire. Brother Mansfield leaned towards that Muhammad had fled due to persecution of his new beliefs early in his career, and that he was like fallen from grace, so to speak. You can either one, it doesn't really change the outcome as you see as we go, but because the whole thing is it's going to open this pit and come out. I don't really lean one way or the other, but those are the two thoughts I had on it. So, moving forward, it said he had the key to the bottomless pit, and that word pit is abyss, and we're familiar with the word abyss. And there's a lot of confusion about what a bottomless pit is. The world, I don't have any of the verses here, but many people in Christianity believe whenever you read the bottomless pit, you're talking about hell, where the devil lives, and it goes right down to that place. Well, all it says is a bottomless pit or an abyss. A bottomless pit is simply if you take a literal hole, like say this hole here, you just don't know where the bottom is. It doesn't mean it doesn't have a bottom. If it didn't have a bottom, it would go clear through the earth and out the other side. So it's kind of ridiculous to say that it has no bottom. It simply means it's a deep beyond where you can fathom or know. Nobody's seen the bottom. You drop a rock down it and you never hear it hit. Well, it hit. It might be 2 miles down and 30 minutes later, but it eventually hits the bottom. So it's not dealing with Satan's world or anything like that. Remember, it's symbolic of something. The fallen star had the key to release what was in the abyss. This is the significance of what's happening here. We have this holding place that something is being held and something's going to be let loose. So what was the abyss? What is it really talking about? We're not looking for a hole in the ground. but a place, as it's always turned out to be, of military movements for masses. Something large going to move, because when you see what comes out of it, as it said, the locusts, and we'll look at that in just a minute. Now, I'm going to give you one suggestion about what it might be, and it fits because it's in the line with where this army came through. Now, you got to look at this map for just a second. This is a topographical map of Israel and the Jordan River and the Dead Sea, and you can see the Mediterranean. It's the best one I could find for this, what I'm going to show you here. Right down here is the Arabian Peninsula. This piece of land connects the Arabian Peninsula, and up here is the Eastern Empire. When you go through Syria, the next step in is into the Eastern Roman Empire is at the top. Consider this a corridor, so to speak. And I just put this out as a suggestion to you. Here we have the Dead Sea, which is 1,351 feet below sea level. Up here, Mount Hermon, where the entrance into the Eastern Empire is 9,232 feet above sea level. And if you take that, that's a difference of 10,583 feet. From that point to that point, it's 10,000 feet. And we know that the Dead Sea is the lowest place on the planet, and nothing lives there. It can be possibly interpreted as the pit itself. But I'll leave that for your perusal to think about. And this is the point of egress that this next army actually moved, and we're going to look at. The Muslim, as they moved in to Rome, they actually came up through the lowest place on the earth. And it could be just for spiritual significance, but there's more to it than that. But I just wanted to put that. I thought it was a very interesting point to consider, that this point of egress. And the Dead Sea, as we're going to find out, was sort of like the entrance to Rome, or the pathway, the sidewalk to Rome. So let's go back to our verses. With that in your head, just put it in the background and think about it. It says, when he opened the abyss, smoke rose from it like the smoke of a gigantic furnace. The sun and the sky were darkened by the smoke from the abyss. And there came up out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. So here we have these two bugs or creatures that are now in here. We have locusts coming out of the pit. Now this, to me, was absolutely fascinating. Now, first of all, let's compare. Why would they use locusts? Well, in this picture here, and this just happened about 2 or 3 years ago, somebody found this picture, and what it was actually a locust outbreak obviously over in Africa somewhere. That elephant is the largest land animal on earth. How big is a locust? About 6 inches long. Put them all together at once, and they dwarf an elephant. Think about that. Why did he pick locusts? Because it is a massive army that cannot be stopped. It's almost like you just got to sit back and let them go. You can't stop it. You can kill a lot of them, but you can't stop it. And this picture shows when you think about what we're going to look at, this is what the Lord gave us to consider and compare to what's about to happen in this fifth trumpet. And I just think it's, as a guy, I guess, who likes bugs and things like that and creatures and stuff, I think it's fascinating. I really do. But here's where it gets even better to me. Why was the symbol of the locust picked? Now, here's a couple of things. Many locusts generate from the Arabian Peninsula. This is a known fact. At certain months of the year, the locusts are most commonly known coming up from the Arabian Peninsula. It's interesting here, the pronunciation almost identical in Hebrew to Arab. Locust is arbe, and in Arab is arbi. It's very similar. Maybe that's something, maybe it's not. I thought I would put it in there. Now, this is very interesting. This is tradition, and this is history has recorded this tradition, And look what it says. Even though it's not, even they'll say it probably really didn't happen. Muhammad's tradition says that in the course of his revelations, when he was getting all of this from, all the Quran and all, and writing it down, locusts dropped into his hands, bearing an inscription on their wings, describing them as the army of the great God. That is folklore, but of all things to be written into their traditions, this creature becoming the army of the great God, and it was written on their wings. This is what they've recorded as happening. You can't. To me, it's kind of like hard not to believe that it's not what it's talking about. Somebody might say, no, it wasn't Islam. To me, I'm leaning towards that way because of these things right here. Now we're down to about 2 minutes. We're going to go into the thing next week in 2 weeks rather, when we come back, about the scorpion part and all. We don't have time because this whole Islam thing covers a long period of time. But this is Muhammad as he supposedly appeared at that time. His name was Abu al-Qasim Muhammad. He lived from 570 AD to June 632 AD to age 62 or 63. He didn't really live that long. I don't know. I believe that's the last slide that Walter has queued up. So mine will keep going. But just real quickly, Muhammad secured the Arabian Peninsula, but he never entered Rome. And we're going to get into him in more detail. But just to go back and to think about the Muslim in that day were not called Muslim, they were called Saracens. And they're Saracen locusts is what they're called. And we'll get into that. I wish we had more time. I get really wound up about this and want to keep rolling on through, but I'd have you here for another 30 minutes if I could. But anyway, we're going to stop right there. We got Muhammad queued up now, and we'll look at him in more detail. Are there any questions? We got about 2 minutes. Anybody like to add anything or ask any questions?
Muhammad never did enter Rome. Specifically, he didn't enter into the sovereign lands of the Roman Empire at the time. He personally, he died in Arabia.
Yeah, he died. He was putting this religion together for a good part of his older life, and people were really, it was just exploding around him. If you read the history,
suddenly without naming an heir to his position as leader of the Islamic people. Yeah, and that's the problem today with that exists between the Sunnis and the Shiites today, because they're still fighting as to who was the proper successor to Muhammad, because he didn't get around to naming a successor, having died suddenly.
As we'll see next week, his father-in-law took over. We'll look at that real quickly. It's kind of a Jacob and Esau thing that still exists today. You can see how these feuds still exist. That's why these trumpets are they're more, we can associate with it more because we see these conflicts still in the world. So, but if there's nothing else, I'll one more. Okay.
In reference to the bottomless pit, that it's translated in the Authorized Version, it more literally should be translated the pit of the abyss. The pit of the abyss, and on your visual there of the cutaway of the topography there, that Jordan Valley that led down into the Arabian Peninsula, that is the pit or the shaft. It should be translated the shaft leading to the abyss. So the Jordan Valley is the shaft or the pit leading to that abyss that was situated in the Arabian Peninsula.
Yeah, that's when we come back in 2 weeks. I have a map, not done by the Christadelphians, showing the armies moving up through that area. So it fits very well that of all places that they came up through the lowest part of the planet. It's just things that God has given us, again, That's why I named this class Guideposts Through Time. Little things that He has given to His saints of the ages to watch and keep looking that would normally never even be of any value to anyone. But to us, they're the guideposts to tell us you're looking in the right place. And keep looking and don't stop, because I'll show you the rest of it as it unfolds. So if there's nothing else, well, then I'll say good night, and we will see you in 2 weeks. So good night, and God be with everyone.